Summit on the migration crisis in Europe. The African Union Commission, as well as representatives from the countries including Eritrea, Nigeria and Sierra Leone, are expected at the summit. And to give us an update, we're now joined by our correspondent Dan Whitehead, who is at the proceedings there. Dan, a very good afternoon to you. Look, now the last time we spoke yesterday, you briefed us on the reasoning behind this, so to say, impromptu summit. Now take us through today's events. Have all the delegates arrived? What is expected from now on?
Well, the delegates will be arriving in the next 10 minutes or so officially. More than 30 delegates from Africa and more than 20 from European countries are gathering here at the summit in Valletta. The key aim really to find some solid concrete solutions to the migration crisis, which of course has affected Europe over the last few years and really hit the headlines this summer. One of the big headlines which has come out from the schedules today is this new trust fund which European officials want to set up, a 1.8 billion euro fund, money for African countries. In return for that, though, they want to see African nations doing more to tackle the refugee crisis at source. And one of the conditions for that money would be the readmission, taking back some of the more economic migrants, not refugees, not those with a clear cause, fleeing conflicts, fleeing war, but those with an economic reason for leaving, to make it more attractive to stay in their country. That fund is something which the leaders are expected to be signing at a ceremony on the second day, tomorrow. But for now, the leaders due to arrive in the next 10 minutes or so. There'll be an official opening ceremony and then an hour and a half opening session before they break at around 9 p.m. South Africa time tonight.
And when the migrant crisis began, blame was put on Africa for not taking its own displaced citizens. The invitation of African leaders to this leg of talks, how important is it in outsourcing and perusing every possible solution regarding this migrant crisis?
I think it's going to be key. Much of the talk between European countries has seen a lack of unity over the summer about how they resolve it, because there's so many different opinions between many of the European countries over how to distribute the migrants arriving here, the legitimate migrants, and how to sort out the issue in the Mediterranean Sea. I think the clear message, certainly from the European side at this summit, is that this has to be a joint effort. One of the European officials saying that we must build opportunities, not walls, when it comes to Africa. And I think in terms of the message of sorting out the problem at root, that comes in terms of investment in economic stability, improving governments, and in some of those countries where the number of migrants are high. When we look at Nigeria, when we look at Eritrea, those are the countries which are going to be really targeted with this fund of money. The details exactly on how that will be spent are yet to come. We'll see that in the coming days and weeks. But the clear message is really that it has to be a joint effort, and the money has to be spent at source in the destination countries from where these migrants are coming from, if they are going to see a reduction in the number of migrants arriving on the shores of Europe.
Look, let's further speculate a little bit, Dan. I know you'll give us the right answers after the meeting, of course, but ideally now, how will the solutions taken at this summit be affected, Dan? Will all dignitaries receive EU instructions of action when they go back to their respective nations? What's going to happen so we know that this wasn't just a talk shop?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they're not redefining the framework of how these changes are implemented. They're simply coming up with some solid concrete ideas, and those will be implemented relatively quickly through European directives and in direct cooperation with organisations such, of course, as the African Union. The other elements that they're talking about, aside from this trust fund, of course, is breaking up the business model for the human traffickers, the smugglers who are making a lot of money bringing those people over the Mediterranean Sea in unseaworthy vessels. Of course, more than 3,000 people this year alone have died doing that. They also want to improve the legal migration routes for the highly skilled workers, whether they're coming from African countries or for Syria, for instance, Afghanistan, Iraq, which of course many European countries want in their countries to bolster their labour force. There is mutual interest in resolving this issue, and actually the stress at this summit is that this isn't just a negative thing. There are opportunities here, not only for African countries but also European countries, and that to a certain extent this crisis of course should be embraced and turned on its head to make those opportunities more positive for both continents.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was Dan Whitehead, our correspondent in Malta at the EU's Migration Crisis Summit. In other news, the swearing-in of new members of Nigeria's cabinet is being done in batches. The first 4 ministers have been sworn in at the presidential villa in the capital, Abuja. They signed an oath of allegiance before shaking hands with President Muhammadu Buhari. President Muhammadu Buhari vetted the opponents